To truly understand why boiled sand became such a feared weapon, we have to step into the mind of a soldier who faced it. Ancient warfare was dirty, exhausting, and brutally physical. Most fighters were used to cuts, bruises, broken bones, even fire. But what they were not used to was a weapon that attacked them from the inside of their armor. Boiling sand was one of the few weapons that turned a soldier's greatest protection, his armor, into his worst enemy. Imagine climbing a ladder during a siege. Your shield is up. Arrows are thudding into the wood. The weight of your armor is dragging at your shoulders. Then, with no warning, a thin stream of glowing sand pours over the top. It hits your helmet first. The metal amplifies the heat instantly. Grains slip through the eye slits, into your beard, down the neck guard. At first, you think you can endure it. But then the real pain begins, sharp, needle-like stabs of heat burrowing into your skin. You try to wipe it away, but that only spreads it. You try to breathe, but the heat stings your nostrils. You panic, and in that split second of panic, your grip loosens. You fall, or your shield drops, or your formation breaks. This is why commanders feared boiling sand. It was a weapon that destroyed discipline. Armies throughout history experimented with ways to turn heat into a tactical advantage, but none were as portable, as silent, or as cheap as sand. It required no metalworking skills, no expensive materials, no fuel beyond firewood. A fortress under siege could produce enough boiling sand to defend a wall with almost no resources. Some fortresses took the tactic to an entirely new level. Archaeologists, studying fortified cities in Persia and Anatolia, discovered stone troughs carved into high parapets, long channels where sand could be heated and held until attackers approached. These weren't random constructions. They were purpose-built sand heating systems. Some channels were positioned at angles that allowed defenders to simply pull a wooden stopper and let the sand slide downward like a controlled avalanche. In other regions, especially North Africa, defenders mixed heated sand with crushed seashell powder. This mixture produced a sharper, more abrasive grain that adhered more aggressively to skin. The result wasn't just burning it, was a tearing burn, ripping tiny layers of skin as soldiers tried to brush it off. Such mixtures were designed not to kill outright, but to disable, leaving attackers screaming in agony long enough for defenders to target them easily with arrows or spears. Even more intriguing is the role boiled sand played in siege psychology. Ancient generals knew that the mere knowledge of this tactic could deter enemies. There are recorded cases where armies delayed or even abandoned assaults after learning that a fortress had prepared sand-heating braziers along the battlements. No soldier wanted to be the first to take a burning shower of invisible fire. To understand why this mattered so much, you need to consider an often overlooked fact. Ancient soldiers rarely died from clean sword strikes. They died from shock, infection, panic, or retreating in disarray. The sand weapon targeted morale. It turned brave warriors into terrified, unfocused fighters. And in pre-gunpowder warfare, morale was everything. One Roman historian described a battle where a small defending force held off a far larger army simply by combining two tactics: boiling sand and narrow wall walkways. As attackers climbed, defenders dropped heated sand at the exact moment when the enemy soldiers were most vulnerable. The attackers tried to retreat, but the ladders were packed with men behind them. Chaos erupted. Soldiers pushed, fell, trampled each other. The defenders hardly used swords. The sand did most of the work. And then there's the forgotten maritime use of boiling sand, one of the most extraordinary adaptations of all. Naval combat in the ancient world was brutal: boarding, grappling hooks, fire ships. But on wooden decks, open flames were risky for defenders too. So sailors heated sand in metal pots, using small braziers shielded from the wind. When enemy marines attempted to board, defenders shoved entire trays of burning sand onto the planks between ships. The sand ignited dry ropes, burned attackers' bare feet, and slid into every fold of their armor. Naval records from the Mediterranean describe attackers screaming as they tried to stamp out grains that simply could not be stamped out. Even today, naval museums display bronze and clay heating pans, once used for this exact purpose. Most visitors never guess what they were for. They look harmless, like basic cooking tools, but in their time, they were among the most feared instruments on the water. Another dimension rarely discussed is how boiling sand was prepared. Soldiers didn't just scoop sand from the ground and throw it on the fire. Many armies developed special sieving techniques to separate large grains from fine powder. The finest sand was used for close-range attacks through murder holes. Coarser grains were heated for tossing or slinging because they held heat longer and traveled farther before cooling. Some sources even describe early forms of thermal traps. Defenders poured heated sand into clay jars and buried them just under the surface of narrow passages leading into fortresses. When attackers stepped on them, the jars shattered, releasing sand that clung to the soles of boots and the exposed skin around the ankles. It wasn't lethal, but it slowed the attackers, demoralized them, and made them vulnerable. One chronicle from the Caucasus describes an ingenious trick. Defenders mixed heated sand with sticky tree sap. When poured, the sap melted and spread the sand even more aggressively. This paste created a burn that couldn't simply be shaken off. It adhered, like a primitive incendiary gel. The tactic was used sparingly because it required precious materials, but when it appeared, it was infamous. Finally, what makes boiling sand such a remarkable piece of military history is the fact that it weaponized something universal. Every army had access to sand. Every culture understood heat, but only the most strategic, most desperate, or most innovative warriors realized the potential of combining the two. Weapons come and go. Iron replaced bronze. Gunpowder replaced blades. But boiling sand reminds us that some of the most devastating ideas in human history didn't require advanced technology at all. They only required creativity, observation, and the willingness to use nature in its harshest form. And that's why this tactic remains one of the most haunting footnotes of ancient warfare, proof that sometimes the deadliest innovation can fit in the palm of your hand.